Hello, ladies, and Happy New Year, and welcome to our winter scene watercolor tutorial. In this painting tutorial, I'm just going to be doing a small 5x7 sheet of watercolor paper here, only because I think it'll go a little bit quicker than doing a really large piece as a landscape. Normally for landscape, so I do larger, but for this demonstration, I'm just going to be doing a smaller 5x7, but you can use whatever size watercolor paper you'd like to use. So there really is no drawing, basically, for this painting that I'm going to be doing. I'm just going to be putting in a little bit of a horizon line, and that is it. Everything else is just going to be painted and not drawn. So I'm going to just use a light pencil for this. So I don't know if you'll be able to see my line, but I'm going to do the my horizon line. I don't like to ever really do it right in the middle. So I'm going to be bringing it up just a bit, right above the middle a little bit. And I'm not going to be making it straight across. I'm just going to be kind of making a little hilly and, a little, not perfectly straight, just a kind of, you know, a wonky kind of line. So that's all of the drawing I'm going to be doing for this. And I'm only going to be using 3 colors. I'm going to be using a little tiny bit of alizarin crimson red, a little bit of indigo, and a little bit of Payne's gray. Now, if you don't have these colors, you can substitute them with any kind of a red, a cooler red, a darker red. Um, I'm thinking maybe like, well, Scarlet Lake, maybe. I'm not going to be using a ton of red, so you can even go without the red. Basically, if you don't have alizarin, I would probably just skip the red because I'm barely going to be using any of that. Indigo, you could also use, if you don't have indigo, you could use ultramarine blue, you could use Prussian blue, um, any kind of cooler, darker blue would work. And then Payne's gray, basically, if you don't have Payne's gray, you can get Payne's gray by mixing, you can get a gray color by mixing ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. That'll give you a nice gray color. So they're really just these 3 simple colors that I'm going to be using. I'm going to start off using my 1-inch flat brush to wet my sky area first with just plain clean water. Now, the key with watercolor painting, to me, what's most important is the type of paper that you use. I use 100% cotton paper. I use Arches brand. Any brand really is good as long as it's 100% cotton. If it's not 100% cotton, chances are it's made from pulp and it dries really quickly. The benefit of using 100% cotton paper is that it stays wet longer and you have more working time. I've seen students get really frustrated when I'm teaching that their paper dries really quickly and it doesn't blend as nice. So, and I always suggest to them, I know watercolor paper can be really pricey, but if you can just even buy, a small 100% cotton pad of paper, you will see a huge difference in your paintings. So I always just kind of recommend that for students that are really serious about maybe learning watercolors and continuing with their learning. If it's just a hobby and you don't really, it's not a big deal to you, then don't worry about it. But just know that if it's not 100% cotton, it will dry much quicker, and you might, have a little bit of trouble blending and things like that. So just a little FYI. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is just wet my 1-inch flat brush, and I'm going to just wet the top portion, my sky area, with my brush. So I'm just going to go down to my horizon line with just clean water, and I really get it nice and loaded because I want a nice even layer of water over my paper, nice sheen to my paper. And I have this taped down to a gator board or any hard surface you can tape it down. Is where it will work as long as you can lift it up and manipulate it, move it around. I've seen people tape it down to their table, and that's not going to work because you got to be able to lift it up. So I'm going to continue with my flat brush. I'm going to grab a little bit of indigo here, and I'm going to get it nice and saturated on my palette. So I've just added some water to that, and it's really a nice, beautiful dark blue color. And on my wet paper, I'm going to just paint across the top, going over my tape with that nice, dark, rich blue color. And now I'm just going to rinse my brush, and I'm just going to use clean water now to pull that paint down. This is a graduated wash where you are just pulling that paint down with water. And here, I've got a couple bubbles. Here at this point, just water. I'm going to pick my board up and let that paint run down to my horizon line. And you'll see it'll start to bead up here. And that's fine. It won't go any further than the horizon line. So now I'm going to tilt my board to the side a little bit and just kind of sop up any excess water that might run down so I don't get any blooms, any run backs when I tilt it the other way. As it's drying, I don't want any blooms in my sky, so I'm just tilting it from side to side and letting that paint just run down. And you can tilt it forward again a little bit. And as you can see, it really kind of beads up at that horizon line. To the side again. Any excess water. Okay. You could also, if you wanted to, let's see, where did I put that? You could also lift up, there it is. You can lift up your board and just kind of keep it on a 45-degree angle about, or you know, if you wanted to put like a roll of tape or something and let your board sit like that, and gravity will help that paint to come down as well. But I'm just going to leave mine flat for right now. And continuing with my flat brush here, I'm going to rinse it off. Now at this point, I'm just going to be using my brush to kind of kiss that horizon line with my wet brush. And I'm just going to be using my wet brush to kind of now pull down some of that color from my sky. And I'm just going to be making like little, on my dry paper here, little streaky marks that I've just used from my sky. So it's basically, I know it's kind of hard to see, it's basically like I've just pulled a little bit of that color down from my sky on my dry paper with my flat brush to make little streaky kind of snowy looking hills. And you can do as many or as little as you like for this. So I did a few coming to the left and a couple coming to the right. And then at this point, I'm going to be taking my indigo. You really could just do this with one color. I swear, you could really just use indigo if you wanted, or Payne's Gray. I'm going to take a little bit of my indigo right on the edge of my flat brush, and where I have put these little streaky marks, I'm going to just kind of touch inside there where it's still a little bit damp from putting those little streaky marks, and I'm barely pressing down on my paper to just kind of add a little bit of darker, high, little saturated, darker hill marks. So I'm barely touching my paper. I'm very lightly. And you see I'm holding my brush way back. I'm not holding it up here real tight like. I'm holding it back. So I have less pressure on my brush. And I'm just tapping ever so slightly little marks on my paper. And that's all they are marks. No right or wrong here. So I'm going to grab a little bit more of that indigo and a little bit more of my indigo and just kind of continue on those little streaky marks here and there, adding some darker value to really kind of bring some of those hills out, leaving my horizon line right now. I'm not really going to focus on that yet with my trees and things. I'm going to just kind of continuing making little marks here and there. Okay, so now I'm going to rinse my brush again, blot it, get all the excess water off, and I'm going to just go in and just on some of those darker marks, as you can see, I'm just kind of going underneath the very bottom of those darker marks and just kind of softening some of them and just kind of making, a little bit more marks here and there. So it just kind of creates a nice, soft, hilly landscape. Okay, at this point, I'm going to let my sky dry another minute. And then what I'm going to do is really mix up some creamy Payne's Gray and indigo. Creamy, not as watery paint. And I'm going to add in my trees. And because and my sky is still wet, and it's going to allow those top of those trees to fuzz out a little bit and not create really hard edges. So I'm going to let that sit just for another minute while I'm going to mix up, using my flat brush, some creamier paint. So I'm going to use a little indigo, and you can see how that's just kind of sits on my palette, and it doesn't move around as much as this did because there's not as much water. So I'm going to add a little bit of my indigo and a little bit of my Payne's Gray here, and just kind of mix those two together to get a nice thick saturation of color. Okay, so I'm just going to take my flat brush now that I have this nice creamy paint, and this is dried just a little bit. It's still a little bit damp. And I'm just going to take my flat brush. Now, if you're more comfortable using a round brush at this point, like a number 8 or a number 6 or a number 10, whatever number round you prefer to use, you can do that. So at this point, I'm going to just use the corner of my flat brush, and I am just going to dot in some tree shapes here. Now, I might have let it dry a little too much. It's not really fuzzing out as much as I'd like it to, but that's okay. So I'm just going to be putting in some really just some shapes here to act as bushes and trees. Have them go up a little higher here and there. And you can be as random with these as you like. Just drill. I'm just making little marks here with my flat brush to create some, suggesting just some little tree shapes here, little bushes here and there. Okay, so let me rinse this brush really good. And now I am going to switch to a round brush. So I'm going to get my number 8 round brush, And because I let this dry a little too much, still a tiny bit damp, but not as damp as I'd like it to, I'm going to take my round brush just a little bit of a damp brush here and just hit the very tops of these trees. I just wanted them to blur out a little bit more. So as you can see, I'm getting all that excess water off and just using that damp brush to kind of hit the tops of those trees. I do a little bit at a time. I then rinse my brush and go over them again. And this is where my cotton paper really works nicely. It blends so nice. So I'm just hitting these while this paint here is still damp. If I waited for it to dry, they would not fuzz out these top edges. So they just kind of look like little distant trees. Little bit. Remember, this is more of an abstract kind of painting. I'm not worried about being photorealistic here at all. So I'm going to just take a little bit more of that paint and kind of go over some of those wet edges with a little bit of that paint mixture. While that's damp a little bit. Okay, just like that. I'm going to take a little bit of that paint on my number 8 round here, and I'm going to just kind of go on my horizon and just kind of sweep. Look where I'm holding my brush too. I'm not holding it like a pen, and I'm just kind of sweeping along the bottom edges of those trees on that dry paper there. Just kind of connecting them to the land a little bit. Kind of anchors them down. Okay, so now at this point, there's a couple things you could do. We could wait for this to totally dry, and then I could go in with even with my number 8 here and use the point, or a smaller round brush, or even a liner or rigger brush, which has longer bristles. This is my number 3, I believe, rigger. The number is 1 or number 4. And rigger brush is basically just a brush that has longer bristles on the ends and makes nice long linear marks. You could use that kind of a brush. You could use your round brush. And after this has dried, we could go in and make some spiny, like more barren tree shapes that have there's no leaves. Or you could use a hard edge, like an edge of a paint tube would work. Or if you have a brush, like my flat brush here has this angled edge that you could use as well, or any hard edge, like an end of an old credit card, anything like that. And you could go in either while this is still damp, and you could scrape in some small tree shapes, or you could wait till it's dry completely and do the same thing and scrape in. And what will happen is, if I do this while this is damp, you're going to be making darker marks. So I'll do a few little lines here in that wet tree area, just making little dark lines, little tree branch marks. And what happens is the paint that's wet right there will fill in. Well, it will fill in where I've scraped. So it created like a valley where that wet paint just kind of fills in. Now, if I waited till this was completely dry, then if I went in and scraped, it would scrape some of the paint out and would make lighter trees. So you really have options there. You can wait till it's completely dry, or you could go in while it's damp and just make little tiny scrape marks to, you know, kind of make it look like there's some branches. And things like that. So I'll do that. I'll do a couple darker ones over here, but I want to show you what it looks like when it's dry, how you can scrape out the paint to make it look lighter. Now, once you do scrape, though, these scrape marks are permanent, so it's not like you can blend them out. They are permanent, so they will remain there. I'm going to take a little bit of this. Go up a little. I don't like how that just kind of stops right there. So you can always tweak them. And I'm basically just doing little dots, little marks here and there. Okay, so at this point now, I'm going to take a little bit of my alizarin crimson, tiny bit, just a tiny bit. Put a little bit on my palette, just like that. And then I'm going to take a little bit of my indigo. Add it to that. If you don't have indigo, you can use ultramarine. You could even just use your Payne's Gray. And you see how light that is? It just made a very, very light violet color. Just kind of warmed up that blue a little bit. And you just kind of mix until you get the desired color you like, and that's really pale and a little bit more violet. And now I'm going to just take a little bit of that and just add it to some random places here in my snow. Right on dry paper. Just gives a little bit of other color dimension here in your painting. This is optional. You do not have to do that. So I'm going to just dampen my brush now, rinse it and dampen it, and just kind of blend some of those out here and there. Totally up to you. You make this your painting how you like it, and make as many little snowy hills as you like. So that's really all I use. I'm going to use that red for. So if you don't have it, don't worry about it. All right, that's still a little bit damp. Let me see if I can scrape out some of that color so you can see what I mean by getting lighter tree marks. So I'm really pressing down here, scratching out tree branches. See if you can see that. Where this side, the right side, you can kind of see where I've removed some of that paint, whereas to the left side, I've scratched in while it was really damp and the paint filled back in. Okay. I'm going to start adding some little grasses and some little, trees here in my foreground by using this creamier mixture here. I'm still using my number 8 round. And just getting a little bit on my tip of my brush. And where I have these little darker marks, just pick some random spots if you want, and you can just kind of go in with some little grasses that are peeking out from the snow. Here and there. Maybe a little bit down here off my tape into the foreground. where it will be a little bit more prominent in the foreground and a little bit darker. Your trees and your grasses and such kind of fade out as you go back in the distance. So I have a little pile of grass here, and I do different heights. I don't do all the same height or the same, I kind of will make them go different directions, and then maybe a little smaller distant tree here, maybe right here. I'll just kind of put a smaller tree, like a thinner tree here. And I'm just I'm barely pressing down and just making little branch marks up into the sky. You can put as many or as little as you like. Get a little bit more paint here, a little more saturated, a bit darker, because it is a little closer to us than those distant trees. As you can see, I always kind of go from the inside of the tree out. I never pull from the out in, because you want those branches to be a little thinner as you go out. And don't worry if the branches, if they don't all connect. So you just want real thin. I'm just using the very, very, very point of my brush. And just can do as many or as you like. Just kind of anchor that tree down a little bit. Or maybe I'll do branch that way. Maybe I don't want to do too many on this smaller piece. I'll darken these grasses a little bit. A few little more grassy marks. Bring that up a little. So you can just really, you can be as expressive as you want with this painting. And that's really basically it for this. If you wanted more of your sky to come down, then you would just keep using your wet brush and then really tilt your board forward to come down. It's totally up to you. You can do this painting with basically one color if you want to just paint gray, or your indigo, or even Prussian blue would be really pretty. That's a pretty blue. So let me grab a little Payne's gray here. Just a simple winter scene, that nothing too fancy. I'm just kind of going along my horizon line here. Dotting in a few more bushes. I'm going to rinse. So really, it's totally up to you how many trees you'd like to use, or anything like that. Let me add a little bit, grab a little bit of dark for this trunk. Remember, they do dry lighter, so keep that in mind. Anchor that tree down a bit more. But when you do this tree, you want to wait for this to be dry, because then otherwise these will kind of, they might feather out a little bit. You might create some blooms in your sky, and you don't really want to do that. Let's put a tiny one over here, like one maybe starting to grow. I'll just anchor it down. So it just creates a sweet little landscape. And I'm going to stop there because less is more usually. So let me take my tape off. It always looks better without the tape in this wonky board here. Remember, when you take your tape off, always kind of pull away from your paper in case it grabs it and wants to tear it. We don't want that. Okay, let me move it off this board. So there we have it. And this 5x7 would fit into an 8x10 mat. And we've covered, you know, these edges here. But so there you go, guys. Just a simple little wintry landscape. If you have any questions about what I've used or any of the techniques, please let me know. I will be really happy to answer. And again, if you don't have these colors, don't worry about it. You just use whatever blues that you have. You don't even have to use that alizarin crimson if you want. I just used a little bit here and there for a little bit of a more violet tone to that snow. And that's it. So, all right, guys. Have a wonderful, happy New Year, and I will see you later.